How did that happen? Because people came and said, maybe Freud wasn't right about this. Maybe it should be this way. And then someone else said, well, that's true, but maybe it should also be this.
Yeah.
Right? And it's moved so we don't know what the future is, but what's in vogue today is not going to be in vogue 100 years from now.
David.
Yes.
Welcome to the Creative Spin podcast.
Thank you.
You know, we usually meet at a different dojo. This is a new dojo. But today we're going to be talking about what David is all about. So, last name, Moscovitch. Is that how you pronounce it?
That's good. Yeah.
Moscovitch.
Yeah. Not a lot of people get that perfect.
Got that right. It's my, acute sensitivity to pronunciations. Not really. So you're a clinical psychologist.
Yes.
What got you into that? What was the thing that really told David, I should get myself into this trouble?
That's a good question. I mean, look, it could be a long story or a short story, but the backstory is that I come from a family where both of my parents are psychologists. Okay?
So was there a lot of sitting down and going, David?
To some degree, probably yes.
Yeah.
The different kinds of psychologists. My dad is or was, they're both retired now.
Okay.
My dad, I would say is, because it's still such a big part of his identity, cognitive neuroscientist who focuses on memory and the brain. His area of expertise is on memory and how our brain processes memories. And my mom is or was a clinical developmental psychologist, which means that she focused on child development and working with kids who needed different kinds of special assessments or needs for, let's say, learning disabilities or giftedness. So I grew up in a home where I was hearing a lot about research from my dad and hearing a lot about clinical work from my mom. And I was sure that I wanted nothing to do with psychology myself.
Of course, because every kid has to go the opposite way.
I have to carve my own path.
Yes, exactly.
So my mindset was, okay, I'm not going to be a scientist. I'm not going to be a psychologist. I thought at some point maybe I'd go into law. I was really interested always in criminology, the idea of understanding the mind of a criminal. But then as soon as you get into the mental stuff, psychology covers that, right? So I got to university with the plan to not go into psychology, and I ended up discovering the introductory psychology class about halfway through my time in university, and I just absolutely loved it. It was a perfect fit.
Do you think that it was because you had that what would you call it? Education, somewhat of an education from home, that you're always listening and hearing your parents talk about that kind of?
Probably.
Yeah.
I think so. I'm sure I was socialized to kind of be prepared to love it.
Yeah.
I think there were other factors as well. I really always love working with people. I'm a people person. I saw psychology as a way to not only work with someone, help people, but also to understand them better. And I always have been a person who likes to talk to people and understand what makes them tick.
Yeah.
I'm a very curious person. I'm also a person who likes to discover stuff. So I remember even when I was in grade school, learning about archaeology, learning about ancient history, and being fascinated by these ancient civilizations. And I would go out into, the neighborhood and come home with a little piece of pottery and say that I, discovered some ancient relic, right?
Why not?
Right. So I realized that psychology is also a way for me to discover through research. And so I ended up going into a path that really combined what my dad does with what my mom does, not with kids, but with adults. So
which is what exactly?
So my job consists of a number of different pieces. One is, so I'm a professor of psychology at the University of Waterloo. Okay. So I teach courses to undergrads and graduate students. I supervise and teach the graduate students who are themselves getting a PhD in clinical psychology, how to do therapy and assessment with people who are suffering from various problems.
Okay.
I have a lab where we do research on the topic of anxiety. That's my area of expertise.
So that's your area of expertise, anxiety.
Yes, adult anxiety broadly, but more, if I'm going to be very specific, my area is on social anxiety and the nature of the self.
Yes, I was reading a couple of the documents you sent over. Some really interesting stuff. A lot of it just blew over my head, but nonetheless, very, very interesting. And I think, you know, having 2 kids at home and all of that, and looking at how they had to battle through the pandemic and have to go through all the issues that brought on top of everything else. It was definitely, I think it's definitely an interesting topic of conversation. Have you seen a lot of changes in your area because of the pandemic?
The pandemic was really hard on a lot of people. And also, I think brought people together in a sense that we all had a shared experience to some degree. But I think one of our areas of interest has been looking at how pre-existing problems with anxiety led people to experience different parts of the pandemic in different ways.
Yeah.
So, for example, mask wearing has been an area of focus.
I noticed you guys on one of the documents you sent over, you spoke about that. Touch a little bit on that. Like, I'm curious to see what you guys have found out about mask wearing and all of that kind of thing.
Well, look, I said my area of expertise was social anxiety, right?
Yeah.
So in order to understand what we did, I'm just going to give a little background on that. So social anxiety, what is that? It's fear of social situations or fear of negative evaluation by other people. And when the pandemic sort of started and there was this, you know, none of us could imagine what it would be like to live through a pandemic. The idea that we all have to wear masks. It's before the pandemic, it's a crazy idea. But as soon as it started, I was talking to my students and I said, this is important for people with social anxiety. And I think there's a few reasons why it's important in terms of how it will affect them. And we predicted and did this paper that has gotten a lot of attention actually, because everyone understands the experience of social anxiety, what it means, and everyone understands the experience of what it means to wear a mask in social situations. But what was interesting about, I think, our paper is we predicted different things that people who had pre-existing struggles with social anxiety before the pandemic would find difficult about mask wearing, or how mask wearing would affect them differently. So we talked about 3 different factors. One factor was in the paper that mask wearing is a type of social norm, okay? If you think about the behavior of mask wearing throughout the world or even throughout a particular country, there are places where people during the pandemic, when it was a law to wear a mask, would be more or less likely to wear a mask.
Correct,
right?
Yeah.
So what's more important than the law is the norm of your context. What are people doing around me?
Yeah.
If you find yourself, now it's less of an issue, but back then, if you found yourself in a place where everyone was wearing a mask, you would put on a mask. But if you found yourself in a place where no one was wearing a mask and you wanted to put on a mask, you would feel that feeling of pressure.
It's interesting you're saying that, because last year I felt that when I traveled.
Yeah.
So when we went to Europe, at the time when we left Canada, not everybody, but I would say 90% of people were still wearing masks. And when we landed in Europe, 90% of people weren't wearing masks.
Right.
And it was such a clash that you go from feeling comfortable wearing a mask to feeling uncomfortable wearing a mask.
Yeah.
So how does the brain cope with that? Like, it can't be just a switch that we go, okay, I'm okay with the mask now. No, now I'm okay without a mask. Like, how does that even work with our brain?
Well, I mean, that's a very complicated question.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, that's a very complicated question. I don't know that I have a good answer for that question, other than to say, to bring it back to social anxiety. if you struggle with social anxiety, you'll be very concerned about behaving in a way that complies with the social norms in your context.
So essentially, you're kind of geared into blending in with everybody,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Doing what is expected of you, what you believe is expected of you, which makes sense. And so, especially if the rules are ambiguous, or mask wearing, let's say, is a matter of personal choice, where some people are doing it and some people are not, or it depends where you are, Europe or Canada, that could be very anxiety provoking for someone who's trying to figure out how to avoid being the center of attention.
Or even what's wrong or what's right in this case as well, right?
Yes.
'Cause you don't know. I mean, we still don't know 100% if it was a good thing or if it was a bad thing in terms of health purposes, right?
That's right. The other thing that I think is quite interesting in these contexts is that for people who struggle with anxiety, one of the things we know from before the pandemic is that social cues, detecting and understanding what other people are feeling or what their social cues are, can be more difficult for people who struggle with social anxiety, especially if those cues are ambiguous. Okay. So a neutral facial expression, for example, what does that mean? If you don't struggle with anxiety, you may have a positive spin on it. The person's lost in thought. The person's, doing whatever. If you do struggle with anxiety, you're likely to put a negative spin on it. So masks had this impact on people where you're walking around and you have to try to detect what people are thinking and feeling from their eyes.
Their eyes
alone.
But some people have very, their eyes won't really show what they're thinking, like their emotion. You do actually need to see if they're smiling, because you can smile without smiling with the eyes. And there was a curious thing during the pandemic that a lot of people were talking about is you need to learn how to speak through your eyes.
Yes. So you'd make like an extra effort to...
I'm smiling.
Like the closed eye smile, right?
Exactly.
To make it clear to people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people who struggle with anxiety would have more problems with those sorts of ambiguous social cues.
Makes total sense.
And then finally, I think the most interesting component of this is this idea that when I'm struggling with anxiety in social situations, as an example, what I'll be motivated to do is prevent people from seeing things about myself that I'm worried that they'll judge me negatively on. I'll look socially unskilled. I'll look anxious. I'll look physically unattractive, those sorts of things. So wearing a mask during the pandemic was a sense of relief for a lot of people who struggled with social anxiety. As you probably have seen, even in our own kids, we heard that from them.
Yeah.
It took the pressure off in some ways. You could hide behind the mask. Mm-hmm. And when it was a rule that everyone had to wear a mask, it was a relief for a lot of people with social anxiety. As soon as it became a matter of personal choice, and a lot of people were eager to get back to normal face-to-face interactions, that was really hard for a lot of like my clients who I work with. They really struggle to get back out of the hiding behind the mask mentality.
Yeah, and those are probably the people we saw having a mask on for a lot longer than everybody else. There could have been a concern for health issues, and I fully understand that. But I think a lot of people were, I guess you could say, hiding behind the mask.
It's really hard to know what someone's motivation is.
Yeah.
You're right, though. Like, I assume some people in society who are or were hiding behind masks for longer than others, maybe it was an anxiety thing. For other people, they were maybe protecting vulnerable people in their household or themselves if they're immunocompromised. It's hard to know.
Yeah, you know what? And I'm socially okay going around speaking to everybody and all of that, but I do see the other side of, wearing a mask and going out on the street and not being recognized by anybody. It gives you kind of like a little bit of a freedom too, right? You're like walking around, nobody knows me, nobody's going to bug me, so I'm just going to do my thing.
Yeah.
So there's that side too. Sometimes you need a little bit of privacy, and
Yes.
the mask gave you that, right?
Yes.
It gave you that reassurance that nobody's going to
So what, you keep a mask in your pocket and put it on every so often?
No, here's the thing. If I use a mask, I have to use a hat as well because my hair is kind of
And
known to my
sunglasses?
friends.
There were times during the pandemic where I had sunglasses because of the sun, and I was wearing a hat because of the sun and a mask, and I expected people to recognize me. And I'd go up to them and be like, "Hey, how are you doing?"
Well, here's another one. At Creative 7, I picked up a client during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So we had spoken numerous times with a mask on. And a couple of months ago, I passed by his place, and I'm like, "Oh, can I speak to so and so?" And he comes back and he's like, "Hi, who are you?" Like, he didn't recognize me
you at all.
because all of the other times we had spoken with masks on, so he didn't even recognize me. And then when I said, "Oh, it's Jamie," like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry."
Right. Sorry, I didn't recognize you from your eyes and your eyebrows.
And it was interesting because that person specifically, I had only had interactions with him with a mask.
Right. Yeah.
And I didn't even realize it.
Was weird.
So,
it was weird.
It was so weird when he's walking towards me, and you know when someone is looking at you and you can tell they don't know who you are. That was his face, and I'm like, "Oh, buddy, like we've spoken so many times."
Right.
But then his face, like, "Oh my God, it's Jamie." Like,
you get a lot of information, more than we realized, from the bottom half of people's face, more than we realized.
I think now we realize that, I guess it's one of the good things out of the pandemic is like we understood now how that works in terms of recognizing other human beings. And I think more so recognizing it's what you were saying, the expression, what they're feeling, right? We do need a full face in order to get that.
Yes. And we didn't really realize that, I don't think.
So in terms of school, how was it going through that phase in which I'm guessing you had a year or so online, I'm guessing? How
for
did
my kids or for me?
No, for you.
What I was teaching.
Yeah, teaching. How did that work out?
Yeah. It wasn't bad. Honestly, like I live in Toronto and I work at the University of Waterloo. Okay, so process that for a minute. That's a 90-minute commute at least every direction.
Yeah.
So back in the pre-pandemic days, I would do that 3 days a week to teach and to have meetings and research and et cetera. Whereas all my colleagues were always there every day. I always felt a little absent. Then the pandemic hit and I could hide behind I could be at home. And it allowed me to actually, all that time that I saved not being on the road, allowed me to do so much, connect with my family. I got involved in volunteer stuff. I didn't mind teaching online because of the benefits of being closer to home. And, I got to train more during the day for karate when we had karate classes.
We're going to get to the karate part after this.
But, so the actual
what about
teaching,
the student? Yeah, the teaching part. What about the connection with the students? Did you feel like there was a disconnect there?
Of course.
Because did the same masking effect happen because of Zoom or whatever?
Of course. Like my students were behind their closed cameras most of the time. I didn't force students to put their cameras on because students were anywhere in the world during the pandemic. Some of them were in loud environments where they didn't have privacy. Some of them were in environments that weren't private. Some of them were, in their cars, finding a place to have a quiet time or whatever. So I allowed my students, one of the classes I taught a lot during the pandemic was a class that was like 300 students normally. It used to be in a big auditorium.
Oh, wow.
Where, I loved looking out at the students and we'd have conversations. Now I was teaching to a computer screen with all these students, whoever wanted to come, all these little squares with virtually no faces. Sometimes students would put their cameras on and I would appreciate that, but I didn't mandate it. One of the things I did that a lot of my colleagues didn't do was I insisted on continuing to teach live lectures. So a lot of my colleagues, and it was easier on them, I understand why they did it, they made a series of lectures themselves.
So essentially videos.
And they posted them and they made a roadmap for their students, lecture 1, lecture 2, lecture 3, watch these on your own. I tried doing that the first time I had to teach online and I thought, I don't like teaching to myself in my own office. I'm going to make it live every semester. I'm going to make it live and I'm going to video record myself as I do it with the students in the class and then post that for students
make it
available
available to the students who couldn't make 100%. It. 100%. Yeah. That makes total sense. I would have done the same thing.
Because you want to have people behind the screen, at least listening.
And it brings the real way of doing things,
Totally.
Because I think when you're trying to record something, you're not 100% yourself. You're overthinking, you're trying to get the right angle.
You're not lost in the moment with an audience.
Exactly.
And it also allowed me to do I always did a live Q&A at the end of every lecture for as much as half an hour. So I would do, it was an 80-minute class. I would do a 50-minute lecture, and then I'd allow the students to ask anything they wanted. And that was a really valuable experience.
And did you find that from the student's perspective, do you think that they continue to learn the same way or grasp the subject the same way that they would if they were in school?
I think there's a lot of variability. I think some students probably appreciated it even more than being in school because they had a good setup. And they could learn well in that way. And other students really struggled and really had a hard time, maybe because they didn't have a private setup or a quiet place to learn, or they didn't have good Wi-Fi. Or because
it's still an issue nowadays,
or because they couldn't self-motivate. If they knew they had to be in a lecture hall with their bum in the seat at a certain time, that's one thing. But if they couldn't come to the live session and then they had to watch the video recording of it, you know how hard that is? Like, I'm sure you tried it sometimes.
Obviously. And even with, one of the reasons why I stopped this podcast as an example was because I tried doing podcasts through Zoom, and it's not the same thing. It's just, we need the interaction, seeing the person in front of you, being able to get those cues of if the person is moving, or if the little cues that you need into carrying on a conversation and taking it a certain way, and the response. Because on Zoom, you still have that split second issue that the audio isn't getting there at the exact same time. And that becomes a problem because then the other person starts talking and doesn't want to interrupt you because you started talking, and it just throws everything off. I've done a few because people were in Australia or wherever.
But it's not the same.
I'm not going to fly there just to do the podcast. So I did it on Zoom, but that was like a one-off here and a one-off there. But the main reason why I stopped this podcast was because of that pandemic and because of that feeling.
One of the things I just want to say was, before the pandemic, I think I was the kind of prof who was approachable, but also I enforced the rules. I didn't like a lot of students coming with all sorts of excuses about why I couldn't do this or that. There were certain expectations that were set out, and especially in a big class, it was hard to be very flexible. Once the pandemic hit, I was way more flexible. And my mindset was compassion. Like, this is hard for everyone. I'm a psychologist. I need to exude compassion for my students as much as possible and be as flexible as possible. And so part of my lecture was always communicating that, like being as supportive as possible, trying to let students know that I had their back, making the deadlines as flexible as possible to try to help them.
I think, my wife is also a teacher. She's in high school. And it's interesting, now that I'm comparing like what you're saying to what she said, it is a very different aspect. And obviously it all has to do with age. I think, dealing with teenagers is they saw it as a way of not doing anything and just chilling out and relaxing. While when you're in a university,
it's like self-motivation.
You're there for a reason. You're there because you want to be there. You're there because you want to learn.
That's right. You're choosing.
It's a different
huge difference.
Aspect. And what about in your do you still have like your own patients as well? Like
I do.
Okay.
I have I'm a licensed psychologist.
So you're used to being on this seat.
I'm not used to talking about myself. I'm used to asking these questions.
Okay, we'll do a session afterwards. We'll get an example going on.
No problem.
I think that would be fun.
So I've always had a small practice on the side. It's hard to, I discovered early in my career that the maximum number of clients I can have in any 1 week is like 3 to 4. That's it. So I used to have a space in a clinic at DuPont and Davenport, where I would go on Wednesday mornings and I'd see a few clients. And that worked really well until the pandemic. And then during the pandemic, I moved my practice to Zoom, like everyone did. And I didn't expect that it would go well at all. I didn't believe that we could possibly do good therapy over Zoom. And I was wrong, actually.
Really? Okay.
It's not that it was perfect. It's not that it was as good as being in person with the connection that we're talking about, but it was kind of good enough for a lot of my clients. It's not the case for everyone. I see adults who struggle with anxiety or depression or relationship issues. I know that people who work with kids had a really hard time doing therapy on Zoom with kids.
Yeah. And again, I think it's that age difference, right? That
Totally. But also some adults, it's like like after the pandemic, adults who were doing therapy over Zoom, lots of them wanted to go back in person.
Yeah.
But because my practice is so small, I talk to the clients that I see and I said, look, I'm thinking I'm probably going to stay on Zoom. It's actually very convenient. It feels good. A lot of them are professionals who have jobs. They don't have to spend an extra hour getting dressed and leaving the house and coming
especially
and parking.
In this city, you can't
exactly.
move, you can't go
so
anywhere.
for them, it's also convenient.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hop on Zoom with your therapist for an hour and then hop off and go to your next appointment.
Yeah, it's I think the people that might want to be face to face are people who need an excuse to get out of their lives. And that's a valid point as well. I mean, a lot of people do see that as a break from life, and because I guess if you hop onto a computer, you're still at home, or you're still at the office, or
you don't have a private space. Some people are living with roommates or family, and they end up having, like during the pandemic, how many times did I see a client who had to go and sit in their car or in a closet because they wanted privacy, or in a bathroom with a fan on, right? But their whole family was home with them.
So what are you going to do?
What are you going to do? Or they took me for a walk, right?
Wow. And I guess that's the thing, right? As some people still don't, even now after this whole thing has technically been over, people might not have the right space or the right environment to be online. And I think that's why there might be still a need for them to want to go and see a person face to face.
Yeah. And I think that there's probably going to be research coming out still showing that there are things that are objectively better about doing therapy in person, and other things that aren't objectively better, and that people benefit from either way. So it depends on a lot of different factors.
So you help people that have anxiety, depression. Have you seen an uptick of those issues lately?
I would say those issues have been very prevalent in our society throughout the time that I've been a clinical psychologist. I think that there's good evidence that people were really suffering during the pandemic. And some people really struggled to come out of the pandemic who were hiding behind their masks, so to speak. People who had, different kinds of anxiety, health anxiety, social anxiety. I've seen an uptick in how anxiety provoking it is that things are back to normal, and that's been really hard for them. They liked the forced avoidance. But it's hard for a single psychologist with a small practice to say that I've seen an uptick, because my scope is so limited. I have to zoom out to the field and look at the data.
There's a lot. And while I was waiting for you to come in, I was looking at the news actually. And interestingly enough, there was a couple of articles that popped up about, so one of them was actually on City TV that they had the news that said that according to the Mental Health Commission in Canada, the suicide rate is up 25%, ages 15 to 24.
Since when? Do you know?
That part,
like recently?
Recently, yeah. So this news piece came out 3 days ago. So it's concerning. It's concerning. And the interesting thing is, every time, and I know that the youth is not really your demographic, but I'm sure you're still aware of all of this stuff that's going on. And what do you think us as parents have to do to deal with this situation with our kids?
Oh, it's
from a professional side. Like, what do you think? Is it paying more attention to them?
For sure,
is it being
that's
more
important.
active with them?
For sure, that's important.
Yeah. But
Look, like if I was going to boil down to one thing that I think is really important for any person, it's to feel loved and connected, right? Like, so whatever you can do It's a very simple answer to a very, very complex problem. But that's a starting point.
But the other relationship that I see here that has changed as well is technology. And the way that kids are now so, and when I say kids, youth, there's so
adults
much,
too.
and adults as well. We're all, as a society, let's put it that way, I think we're all a little bit too involved with technology sometimes, and we lose track of things. Do you think as a society we'll eventually go down that peak? I think we're getting to a peak of where everybody's just addicted. I don't know if addicted is the right word, or we just are paying too much attention to
Are you talking
technology?
about social media in particular?
Social media, and I mean, and in anything, gaming as well, when it comes to youth. You think we're getting to that point where possibly we'll start understanding that isn't the right place to be, the right mindset to be, and we'll eventually start working that issue out? Or we still have a few rough years ahead?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the latest big thing is the Chat GPT, the AI technology. Have you been following that?
Yeah.
Right. So that's incredible. That blew me away when I saw that.
Yeah.
How will that not be a part of our life in the future? I don't see it. I see that is going to be more and more integrated into the way we're living. I don't see a future with no technology, but
my concern is the relationship we have with technology.
Yeah, that's something that parents should be talking about with their kids. Like we should all be talking about it with our kids.
Of course. Like, I'm not expecting you to give us the one solution. Here, take this.
But the optimist in me says, sure. Like I've seen in my own life, I have two kids too. I have a 13-year-old and an almost 17-year-old. And my 16, almost 17-year-old has multiple times over the course of the last year decided to erase social media for himself, because he's come to the understanding that he wants authentic social interactions, and he gets sucked into social media also as a time waste. And he's a very kind of unusual kid, I think, in being aware of these things and having the confidence to not be sucked back by FOMO. Because, well, I wouldn't say that fully, because he does get sucked back in. He sometimes deletes and then he says, well, what am I missing out on?
I think it's really hard, and kudos to him to actually do that every once in a while. But especially for that age group, it's so hard because
everything's happening.
Everything is there. Everything is happening there. Everybody's talking about things there. This whole let me go to the coffee shop and talk to people, or that doesn't really exist
Even
anymore.
If you're on the dating scene, like where do you go to meet people? Online.
It's weird for us. For them, it's normal. They see us, what we did, as weird, right? And it's not about being weird. We're not right. We're not wrong. That's my point of view. I think everything changes. If we were able to talk to our grandparents, they would say the same thing about us when we were growing up with TV. Well, we used to hear that all the time. I'm guessing you used to hear it too. Get out of in front of the TV. You're spending so much time. So it just keeps evolving from one thing to another. Now we're complaining about social media. And I think 10 years from now, we're going to be complaining about VR and AI and whatever and all this stuff. And who knows what else is. Let's talk to Elon Musk, see what he's going to come up with.
Exactly. We'll be complaining about something in outer space.
In Mars. Oh, there's revolution in Mars again. But I think it's really interesting how generations show different issues, and I think as human beings we kind of learn to resolve, and that's why I was asking the question: do you think we're going to resolve this issue that we're having right now?
Yeah, I think. Well. If technology wasn't helpful and rewarding in so many ways, it would easily fall away. Right. We're motivated by the rewards and the efficiencies and the helpfulness that the technology gives us, and hopefully some of those things are here to stay.
And they should be, because they help us out too.
Right. But how do we figure out the things that are harmful and change those? And as long as here's the cynical part of me. I think as long as the sort of big corporations who care about the bottom line being making money are pushing those algorithms on people, it's going to be really hard to disentangle ourselves. It's a very powerful, they've figured out very powerful ways to hook us. And we're easily hooked, unfortunately. Our brains get easily hooked, like that dopamine rush of having a liked comment. Oh, someone else liked me. Someone else liked me. That feels good in your brain.
Feels good, David.
It does.
Feels really good.
Right. And they exploit that. Right. And the bottom line for them is money, 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 money. So as long as they're in control of that, it's almost like they're the puppet master. And it's hard for us to break away from that.
Do you feel the school system should somehow start introducing certain classes, subject that would be somewhere in the realm of, in this class, we're going to see how we can utilize technology and utilize all these things.
It's a great idea.
And in a way, alert the kids, okay, this is what it does, but this is what you should be doing. Sort of like getting them to understand the good and the bad side of all of these social media platforms.
Well, will it be effective? I mean, there have been companies like that have gone into schools that have focused on privacy, the importance of not putting your whole life out there, so that when you're older and you're applying for a job, you're...
See, but I think those let's call them classes, those were pointing solely to the negative and putting the fear of life. Oh my God, don't look at...
Not very effective.
Cafe Brasiliano, where the coffee is truly amazing, but that's not all they have to offer. Their sandwiches will make your taste buds dance. Every bite is packed with flavor and freshness. Trust me on this one. The vintage style of this place isn't just limited to the decor. They even have a marketplace of quality products that you can browse while you're enjoying your coffee. Perfect to meet your friends or make new ones. Cafe Brasiliano is the perfect place for coffee, sandwiches, and a unique shopping experience. If you're in Toronto, don't forget to swing by at 80 Miller Street.
Look at what's happening this week, Congress in the US with TikTok and all that. It's kind of crazy. And understandable in a way, but it's kind of crazy in another way, in the sense that Congress doesn't know what they're talking about, and they're kind of making a fool of themselves, I think.
As a fellow TikTok user. I believe
that things like TikTok are out there and they're a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we need to focus on is not so much if they're out there or not.
Mm-hmm.
We should make sure that they're not, enticing violence or anything like that, right? We don't want any of that in society. But if it's available, I think we have a choice to either download the app or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we're talking to our kids, we have the choice as well to educate our children to understand how these things work and how society works and how life works. I mean, I kind of feel like social media, it's just an extension of who you are, right? What we see in social media is an extension or sometimes an exaggeration of what the person feels.
Right, the projected image.
Exactly.
Or the projected image that you want people to see you being.
Exactly.
Not always who we are.
Right. But I feel like if you go to an event and you meet a person, you've never met this person, that person can choose to make themselves whoever they want to be.
Yes.
Right? If they think, I'm never going to see David again, so I'm just going to pretend I'm the king of whatever city, right?
Yeah. Put on a persona of some sort.
But I guess when it comes down to social, there's a bigger chance that you won't really find out the truth.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of got us to where we are today.
Right. Here, like if we were to design a helpful sort of class for students to take that would help them with social media, it could be much broader than just social media. It could be a class that helps them with basic psychological skills, how to recognize and identify your negative feelings, how to take a particular mindset how to recognize what those thoughts are that are underneath the feelings, and ask yourself a series of questions about those thoughts. Are those accurate, or is that just a product of my mind telling me things? My self-critic,
Yeah.
How do I talk back to my self-critic?
And even making people think about, okay, why are you following this type of people, right? Or this subject line? Why are you doing that? Is it good for you? Is it bad for you? I think those questions should be brought up, and starting at a younger age. And I feel like, I say this all the time about the school systems. I think we really need to figure out how to speed up the school system in terms of updating them with all of this new stuff that keeps coming up. Because I honestly feel, and I want to get your opinion on that, is it feels like the school system is way too behind when it comes to that.
Is that the teachers who need training, you think? Is that the method?
I'm thinking it has to come from the top, right? The teachers are teaching what they are told
the curriculum.
There's a curriculum they have to follow, right?
Yeah.
What I think is, if there's going to be a tech class, are those teachers up to date? Are they taking courses all the time? And should they be considered the same as an English teacher? That, if you think about it, it's going to be more or less the same. I mean, there might be some extra changes to the curriculum there, but it's not going to be that much. Like math or science, if something new comes up in science, they might add it on, but it's not going to be as quick and as fast as something like technology, right? So should there be a separate teaching position for that kind of person that needs to be updated every year, right?
I wonder whether there are countries in the world who do this better.
Yeah.
Where they pour a lot of money, the government pours a lot of money into education, where they're constantly updating their curriculum and providing professional development to their teachers and supporting them. I think teachers teachers work their butts off. I know that.
Yeah.
But are they getting the professional development they need to be as successful as they could be?
Well, I know from experience, from what my wife was saying during the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, and when she's like, okay, I think most of the teachers don't know what the hell they're doing online.
Yeah.
And they had to learn everything in a rush. Yeah. I think that's an issue.
Teachers really had a hard time during the pandemic.
I started working on Zoom years before the pandemic. It's been available for a long time. All of this technology has been available for a long time, but there's this, I don't need it, so I don't care about it, and let it be. And I feel like there should be, I'm not going to say a yearly basis, probably on a yearly basis, there should be some sort of like, here's a little update, or you should take a class, during the summertime that, just update yourself on technology. Because guess what? The kids are going to be on that.
Yeah.
Same thing happened with ChatGPT. When everybody's talking about it now, it's been out for quite a bit.
Yeah.
And kids have been using it for quite a while. Yeah. And now they're like, oh, darn it. Now the teachers know.
Right.
Truth came out. So, but if more and more teachers were up to date with it, or if there was like someone at a higher level that would be paying attention to all of that and sends out an email going, okay, guys, everybody, let's get together here. There's this new thing now. Let's not see it as a bad thing. Let's see how we can integrate it, or how we can work around it and utilize it the best way we can, or understand that our kids are using it as well. And let's figure things out, right? As opposed to, oh my God, that's evil, and let's not talk about it. I don't think that's the right approach to technology. It's not going to go anywhere. Yeah. I mean, for any teacher out there that thinks that ChatGPT is the devil and it's not supposed to exist because kids are never going to learn again, I would say no. I would say, let's see how they utilize it. Let's educate them into utilizing it better.
It's funny you're saying this. I agree with you. I was over at my parents' house for dinner last night, and my dad was telling me that he, even though he's retired, he still reads the literature in psychology. And he read about this study where now these AI bots can beat any people in chess and in Go. You know the game Go. But what they found was that by applying these creative solutions, the chat, I don't know if it's a chat GPT bot or something else, the AI bot, by applying these creative solutions to the way they make their moves, humans playing against them learn from the bot to make more creative moves themselves, the research is showing.
Okay.
So moves that they analyzed all these moves for, there's thousands of games you can analyze online, right?
Yeah.
And these researchers analyzed the impact of these AI bots on human thinking.
So I guess the
and
human mind
behavior.
does have some secrets there that we can still unlock, right?
Exactly. So by modeling really creative moves that human beings don't normally think about, humans can learn from those and then apply them in their lives in a more creative way, which is interesting.
Think about it. If you're playing chess and then all of a sudden you think you're the king of chess, and here comes this bot and does a couple of moves that you're not expecting, you're going to be upset, but then afterwards you're going to go, that was pretty cool.
Yes.
And you've now all of a sudden learned that move.
Yes.
Right. And that's how we grow.
Right. So there's a partnership there.
Yeah, 100%.
Is really interesting to think about.
I've always said that. To people who always go, oh my God, social media this and software that. And I go, listen, learn to live with this. We're not going to go backwards.
No.
We're not going to stop having cell phones.
Right.
We're not going to stop having computers. We're not going to stop having people inventing new things.
Right. It's not even just learning to live with it. It's how do we harness it to make ourselves better?
Exactly. Let's make our lives better. I mean, I used to watch the Jetsons when I was a kid, Hopefully we'll get there one day. And not go back to the Flintstones, if you know what I mean.
Love the Flintstones.
Oh man, it's interesting. The concept of human beings, it's always been an interesting side thing for me, right? I'm always so interested in ancient civilizations and all of this kind of stuff that goes out there. And I don't know if you've gone down the rabbit hole of the conspiracy of the human being. We kind of reset ourselves as a society every so often. Apparently there's something happens, either, the earth starts doing some funny stuff with the weather and basically human beings go away. Other people say aliens come and just change us up a little bit and all of that. But regardless of that point of how that happens, because I guess nobody really knows, but it's interesting to think about, is there a reset button in humans that let's start all over. Let's see where they go.
Like a post-apocalyptic reset button.
Right. And a lot of the stuff, like I'm saying this because I got into a rabbit hole, David.
Yeah.
It was, Egypt, pyramids.
Was this a Netflix series?
There was a Netflix series.
Yeah, I think I saw the first
something.
episode of this. Yeah.
Yeah, you go into a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And then you start thinking, right? What are your thoughts on all this stuff? Like,
whenever I am confronted with something like that, the scientist in me says, what's the data? It's like I've been trained by being trained as a psychologist, as a researcher. My advisor always used to say to me, what do your data say? That's your conclusion for your study. And on a bigger scale, I would wonder, it would be really intriguing to say that, there's been these series of resets in civilization, but my first thought is, okay, I need to know what the data are. Like, what would the historian say about that?
Yeah, like one of the things that I saw this week is in one of the tunnels that they are now kind of going through in Egypt, they have this tunnel has enormous blocks of stone cut to a precision that is insane, that are like 9 tons or something like that. How do you do that? How do you make a structure like that?
Yeah.
When we think nowadays, we perceive ourselves to be at the highest level of humanity in terms of technology and all of that, and we could not be able to do that right now.
That's fascinating.
So how did that happen?
I love that stuff.
That's what makes me
I love
think,
those questions. Right? Putting the question out there is amazing to me. I don't know what the answers are, but the questions are really exciting.
Yeah, it would be interesting to find out those answers, because in that documentary, I don't know if it's the same one we're talking about, but in that documentary, they even look at, how precise these stones, like tons and tons these are heavy little stones.
Right.
Cut to precision, like millimeter. Like how?
Right.
And that gets my gears going. But
Well,
then you get into
the answer that you put into that void is that maybe there was an ancient civilization that was so advanced that they had the technology to do something that we can't even do today.
I think so. That's where I'm going.
Right. And I'm
People bring in
reluctant.
the aliens, but I don't know.
I'm reluctant to embrace that idea unless there's clear historical evidence for it.
I know. But then when there's also no explanation based on our...
I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with having the question hanging in the air as a mystery.
Until you know the exact truth, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what
Makes
science
sense.
is. I mean, I say to my students all the time, what's your research question? Find the question. Start there.
Yeah.
And that question can hang in the air for years sometimes to try to, but it motivates us to find the answer to it.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely curious. And I know most people might be looking at themes like these as a way to, because they secretly want us to have had aliens and like super crazy civilizations and all. People want that. It's like, I don't know. They like that side of storyline, and that's
very cool.
That's great. That's cool, but I don't know. I would love to eventually one day figure all this out, and I think it would be really, really interesting.
Yeah.
But and that's why I keep watching these things, because then there's the other side of my brain that goes, okay, let's tone it down a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't know you were such a conspiracy theorist.
Oh, I go into rabbit holes.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I mean, the question is fascinating, and having a documentary where someone is trying to answer that question, maybe in multiple ways with evidence, is really interesting.
It was an interesting series. It's on Netflix. It's Ancient something.
Yeah.
And it's conducted by this journalist. He's an investigative journalist. He's not a historian.
I've seen the first episode of this. It is interesting.
To what you're saying, he points the facts to the facts, and he asks the question.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the answer.
Right, but he's very unpopopular in his field, right? There's a lot of enemies.
Yes, there are a lot of people that don't like him, mainly anyone that's in that field.
Yeah.
But it's because he's asking questions that are going against what has been written in the history books as this is when civilization started and this is how it went. And then he shows, okay, so how do you figure this happened? The dates don't correlate. Things don't match up.
Right.
Things don't make sense that way. So what makes sense?
Right.
I think he's more of the guy that's asking the questions, showing the evidence. It's right there.
Yeah.
And he's asking why.
Yes.
And why aren't archaeologists asking those same questions?
Right. No, those are like fair.
And I don't understand why archaeologists go against him and not try. So if you're not agreeing with that person, you should not just ban that person from continuing their research, but you should then try to disprove them with your truth.
Right.
But that's not happening.
But okay, but I would take issue with that. But I don't know anything about the field of archaeology. But
I know nothing.
But
I just go down the rabbit hole.
But when you say that's not happening, here's my response. My response is, well, who's making the documentary? This journalist is in charge, in control of telling the story however they want.
Of asking the questions, yeah.
Right. And so if a similar series was made by one of the archaeologists who disagree with him, what would they say?
But that's not happening.
But I would like to go into the literature and read why they disagree with his viewpoints. He's not going to present it in his documentary.
Well, he's disagreeing, and they're upset that he's going against the views that they've written down, and they've said that that's how history is, right? And I don't think they want anything to change in a way.
Because it impacts their status as...
Probably. And my thing is blocking him from, like he was saying, that he's been banned from Egypt now. Like, no, we don't want you there because God forbid you find some extra stuff, right? Or there was one of the episodes, if you watch the whole series, there's one of the episodes that he was blocked from going into this place in the States where there's all these ruins with ruins that have the shape of a snake and all of these things. So he's got theories and all of that.
Yeah.
He was actually banned from going in there to see this place.
He must be a real pain in the ass.
Well, to archaeologists, apparently, yeah. Very interesting series. Like, it got me thinking, got me going, that makes a lot of sense. But anyways.
Listen, all scientific fields need debate.
Yeah.
They need a contrarian. They need someone who say, this is your assumption, but I think that it could be very much this way and not this way. Science thrives on that.
Do you feel that in your field, psychology, do you feel like if somebody comes in with really, I'm not going to say weird, different views on certain things, are they seen as an issue, or do people actually consider that point of view? Like,
I guess it depends how insecure the psychologist is whose ideas are being refuted.
Yeah. But do you see it a lot in your field?
All the time.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how the field moves.
I agree.
We've moved a long way since Freud.
Yeah.
Right?
It's been a while.
Yeah. But how did that happen? Because people came and said, maybe Freud wasn't right about this. Maybe it should be this way. And then someone else said, well, that's true, but maybe it should also be this.
Yeah.
Right? And it's moved so we don't know what the future is, but what's in vogue today is not going to be in vogue 100 years from now.
I sure hope not.
Yeah.
You know, I think we're, as human beings, we should thrive in trying to do different things and thinking different ways and looking at different options. I think that's the only way we're going to be able to discover and change and evolve. I mean, that's the only way as humans that we should look at life.
And technology will play a large part in that.
Oh, I think it's going to be 100% part of our lives. And whoever thinks not, I think they're not thinking straight.
Right. Like even in the field of psychology, brain imaging, the idea, the technology required to see what parts of your brain are being activated by different experiences have helped psychologists understand where, like in my dad's area of research on memory, they can localize to specific brain areas where certain things are happening with respect to memory.
I think I need to speak to your dad.
Yeah, it's
because
fascinating.
my memory is very bad, especially names. I don't know if that's like a certain thing, but
I think it's going to just get worse now.
I see if he can open that little door there. See if I can remember people's names.
The more gray hair you have, the less you're going to be good at that.
I'm going to be in so much trouble, man.
I'm with you, man.
Yeah, I know. Remember that picture in karate? I'll put it up for you guys to see what I'm talking about. And where it was, we went to grab our black belts. Was that it? Wasn't it the when
what
we
are you
took that
referring
picture?
To?
That picture where Fred is the only one with black hair.
Oh yeah, there's a group of 6 of us. We all look gray.
Yes,
and then
the gray team,
the younger guy with the black hair still.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it happens. It's life, people. And you know what? Listen, this is a good segue for us to finish this conversation off. Karate.
Yeah,
I've been bringing so many karate people in here from the dojo, and it's been so much fun. And the interesting part is that a lot of the individuals that we just go and have our sparring sessions with or our trainings with are so like yourself. We've known each other for quite a while, but we had never sat down really to talk about stuff like this, right? Because we all have our lives, and that's where we meet to go and train.
Right, in and out.
That's it, right?
Get changed.
In, sweat, get beaten up a little bit.
Yeah, and go back to work.
Go back to life.
Exactly.
And what I've been noticing with this podcast now is like I've been bringing in people that we train with because there's so many interesting people.
Yeah.
And what I want to ask you is, what got you into karate, and why did you get in there?
You know, I've always been interested in playing sports, athletic, even though I don't. It usually surprises people that I'm good at sports because I don't look like someone who plays sports, but I always was into racket sports, tennis, ping pong, squash. Nice. I played baseball. For a long time, my exercise used to be ball hockey. I'd play Monday night with these guys. We'd play ball hockey. Cool. And after a while, it wasn't doing it for me anymore. Exercise-wise, I wasn't benefiting, but also the community had changed in a way that I didn't feel connected. Yeah. And I was complaining with some friends of ours who had us for dinner. I want to find something new. And they were giving me suggestions. Why don't you go around the neighborhood, see what gyms there are? I don't want to go to a gym. Yeah. It sounded so awful. But I said, you know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to explore. So I live pretty close to where we train. And I walked down to St. Clair from my house. A random Monday. It was like the Monday after the Easter long weekend, about 6 years ago. Oh. And I saw Northern Karate. It was a Monday morning. I walk in there, and Hanchi, who's the main guy, right, is preparing for I didn't know it at the time, his weekly Monday class. He's in there alone. And I just met him. I said, hey, I'm just looking for something new. And he told me about them, and he introduced himself to me as...
Oh, you definitely got the best sales guy from the place.
He introduced himself as Caesar, his real name.
Yeah.
Right? It was his first time meeting someone, I guess.
Of course.
He didn't want to call himself by his
rank?
Guru name. And then as I started to do it, I realized it was giving me a couple things. 3 things, I would say. 1, incredible exercise. I sweat like crazy.
I know.
And I am a sweater. And that place just gets me like physically, it really gives me a great workout, which is great for self-care for me. Mm-hmm. I want to sweat like that in order to
it makes you feel like you've done something, right?
My body feels stronger. It's more flexible. And when I sweat like that, I release stress and I feel like I'm taking good care of myself. Okay. Number 2, I love to learn. And there's something humbling about being a white belt when you're 40 years old.
I hear you.
Yeah. And being in that class with, all these people who know what they're doing. You don't know what you're doing. And coming from a position where I'm often the teacher. I'm often the person who is the authority figure in my job, right? And now I am the absolute lowest level of learner. I just really embraced that. Yeah. And enjoyed the experience of moving up and learning one step at a time.
Yeah, it was the same thing for me. And I remember looking at, because we have classes where, the lower belts and the higher belts are in the same class. And I would see the black belts perform their katas. And I'm like, oh my God, like how do you remember all of that? Yeah. And I'm still there.
Yeah. No, you're great.
But now I'm still there when it comes to the newer katas, but we do definitely
It's a lifelong journey of learning. That's one of the things about that dojo is that even when you get to becoming a black belt, as we just recently did, it's like we're now the beginner level of black belt, and there's so much still to learn, which is incredible. And it's mixed with history and culture and
and I was talking to Ricky last week when I interviewed him, and we're always learning. Yeah, and that's what keeps us going. Yeah, right. And in karate, it's knowing that there's always something to learn.
Yes,
and then going back and perfect what you've learned.
Even the most elementary thing.
Yeah. Because one of the things you were saying and that I'm doing, because I said I'm doing now, is I'm going back to the first katas that we learned, and I'm trying to get them to be not perfect, but I'm applying what we know now as black belts to those katas that we did when we were white, yellow, whatever belt, because now it's a completely different kata.
Yeah.
You train differently.
And do you find that you use your imagination differently than you used to?
Oh, 100%.
I found the pandemic was actually good for that when we were on Zoom. We did a bunch of, classes on Zoom, which were really hard, really hard.
The self-defense part was
really hard, but it
for me.
Forced us to visualize a fake partner because we were all alone in our own basements. And
I was lucky. I had my kids. So I could train with them?
Okay, so I was alone and my kids don't do karate.
Yeah.
Even though I try to sometimes use them to, like, let me show you a move and they'd be like, get away. I don't want you to hurt me.
I learned something new.
Right. I bought a Bob, like the punching bag.
Oh, you did?
Like standing punching bag, partly because I needed to visualize what I was doing. And I really trained my imagination way better than I thought I could, to visualize like what happens when I turn my body this way to the person I'm moving.
Do you feel like karate has changed you as a human on your day-to-day life?
Well, the other thing I think I love about karate is the people.
Yeah.
It's a community of real people, like you and the other guys that we train with, and women, are incredible people who I look forward to seeing when I go to train there. It's not just about...
It's a little tribe.
Yeah,
a little tribe
is.
going on.
So I think it has changed. It has changed me in lots of ways. It's given me a new community. It's made me aware of where my limits are physically, like especially when we have to test and we're pushed to the absolute limit. I would normally not do that to myself.
Yeah, I remember when they said, okay, you're ready to go and you're ready to test. I'm like, oh man, I really need to get my stuff right now. And I started training like crazy. I don't know if you remember, I was getting hurt left and right. Like my body was giving up on me. Like, no, you're not supposed to do it this way. Because I was pushing myself, and that sense of responsibility that you don't want to look bad in front of your sensei or the people who have been teaching you up until then. Because if they say you're ready, it's because they saw something in you and you don't want to disappoint them. That's my kind of the way I thought.
Yes.
And I didn't want to disappoint them. I wanted to look, like, okay, I'm actually paying attention.
Right.
I'm actually
you don't
doing
want to embarrass yourself in front of...
And that too, right?
Yeah. But also it's there's a commitment. It's like, I'm going to train 3 times this week.
Yeah.
And no matter how busy my work is, no matter how exhausted I feel, I'm setting aside this time for myself.
And the way we can unplug is just, for me, it's like one of my number one things is like being able to go in there and just unplug from the world is bonus.
Yeah.
Big bonus for me.
Yeah. I'm so grateful that we have it.
100%. Me too.
Yeah.
Well, David, I hope you've enjoyed this little roller coaster of a conversation.
Fantastic.
And we'll have to have you back after you've watched the the ancient aliens, whatever it is.
Right, so I could get on your side with a conspiracy theory. You tried to bait me in there, and I was like,
yeah, I mean, this is
that.
what we do around here. It's okay. It's well, listen, I have to keep having guests over for a conversation, so why not, right? But thank you so
fun.
much.
It's always good talking to you, and
it was really good.
I feel like we could have probably talked for another hour.
Oh,
and
100%.
not run out of things to say.
Well, you never know. In a year from now, we'll do a
follow-up.
Let's see what happened.
Awesome.
Last year. Thank you so much, man.